Hi, today I'll be talking about my road assignment. This is the logbook for the road assignment. So for starters, I'll talk about developing the project. During our production, I contributed to many discussions and production meetings, any that were held, I would take part in. Some would be about costumes, some about our characters, and some about our production like as a whole. So we discussed like kind of what style we're supposed to like perform in, like the first kind of like performance, the first kind of discussions we had discussions about like what style it is. What we had a discussion about what road as a whole, what it should look like at the end, and any discussion we had, I would contribute as much as I could, and whenever need be, I would. Yeah. During the course of our production, I took part in a workshop for acting drunk. During the workshop, we worked on how our characters would walk and talk if they were drunk, so their stance and the way they'd talk. So when we walked around, we'd be stumbling and stuttering our words when we talked. And we did that until it felt kind of natural and we felt we could act within being in that state. And then also during the course of our production, we all led our own warm-ups, and a lot of people in their own warm-ups, they had one that we would have to act drunk in, so we'd do a drunk version of freeze tag or something like that, and it allowed us to expand further in the workshop. Yeah. During the production, I did many things to prepare for the production. First and foremost, I had to learn my lines. I looked at many ways to learn lines, and there are many different techniques to learning lines. For example, writing out the lines and trying to write it from memory, running lines with someone, or learning cue lines. Throughout the whole process, I tried many different techniques and methods whilst trying to learn my lines. First, I had to memorize my monologue for the audition process of our assignment. I had to learn the Valerie monologue. I went about this by covering up the line below and trying to learn it by reading the line below once and covering it up and then just repeating it till it stuck. So for example, it starts with, "I'm fed up with sitting here waiting for him." I'd read that 3 times till it's in my brain and stuck. And then I'd have the rest covered up, then I'd take a line out, so it'd say, "I'm fed up with sitting here waiting for him, he'll be another 100 years at this rate." And then I'd cover it back up, he'll be another 100 years at this rate bit. And then I'd repeat the entire thing again, so "I'm fed up with sitting here waiting for him, he'll be another 100 years at this rate." And I'd do that 3-4 times over until it's stuck in my head. And this method, it usually works for me. It's normally my go-to, especially if I have like a long monologue, because it normally, I find, works better for me if I have like a long piece that I have to remember. Rather than like a conversation in the script. So for the Valerie one, it was very useful. Just having to just like, "I'm fed up of sitting there waiting for him," and then just having it just repeated, just so I can learn more and more and more and more and more. And I'm still repeating the bits before, so then it has like a longer time to like, no matter what, I'm learning the new lines and then remembering the ones that I learnt before that, and then it stuck pretty fast for me. It's normally my go-to, like I said, and as I use the same method when I did my monologues for uni as well. And when I was filming, when I was learning this for the audition process, it only took me about like 30-40 minutes to learn the entire monologue. And then after I learned it, I worked on like the characterization, the actioning all my lines, and yeah. But that's how I learnt the Valerie monologue most of all. After I'd auditioned, I got the roles for Claire, Molly and Linda, which is quite a hefty amount of lines. I knew that I now had to learn. I'm not gonna lie, for these lines I quite struggled to learn them. It wasn't so much about the actual learning of the lines, it was just I didn't have a great time management at the time, and like around February, and I struggled to fit it all in. That mixed with a lot of lack of motivation at the time made it hard to learn the lines. The way I stopped this and started to persevere was I reminded myself how excited I was originally at the beginning of this entire project. I was very excited for the production, as not only is our last one, it's also my passion. I love being in theatre and being part of a production, making a character mine and developing it from a script. It's something that I love to do, and I think I just needed to remind myself of this. And as soon as I got back on track to where I kind of have to be, I got back on track to learning my lines, and I started with Molly's monologue. As I find it a lot easier to learn monologues rather than dialogue, this time I went about learning it by writing it out with a combination of the other method and writing it out. So I'd do what I did for the Valerie monologue, and then just, I also wrote the entire monologue out. I thought honestly, it didn't work as well as the other one. I don't think writing it out really helped me that much. However, it got the job done. So while learning these lines, I actioned them, as I know I had to do a lot of things in the scene with props. This helped a lot when learning the lines, because I knew that I had to pick up the teapot. I know I need to put on red lipstick. I knew there was quite a lot of movement in the scene. So when I was it really helped a lot learning the lines, because I knew what I had to do as well. So when I was on stage, I'd associate my movements that I already knew with my lines. So it was okay learning the monologue. I think if I went about my normal approach to learning monologues, it would have went a bit better, but I still got it done, and I still think I did a great job with it. And with my character of Molly, I, early on in the production process, bought the dressing gown I wore, because as soon as I read the monologue, I associated her with this kind of bougie old lady who wore a long dressing gown and smoked like a pack a day, almost like Dot Cotton in EastEnders, which is where I got a lot of my influence from, because straight away it's the kind of vibe that I got from her character, and it helped me a lot with this in mind, and having the costume already down. It helped me work on her stance, how she stood, how she moved about. It was quite fluid, almost like she was always in a little trance, almost she was always a little bit tipsy. That's how I kind of made her how she would stand and how she would move, how she'd sit down. I all of this inspiration and how her costume, it helped me figure that out, and knowing the lines, it just all fit in very well. And especially the tone of her accent and how she'd enunciate her words, a lot of that came from my inspiration and what I instantly got, and with the costume and everything, and with the tone and how she spoke. I'd always speak with kind of this very blasé kind of attitude. So she's very she doesn't really have a care in the world, except from her tea and going out. That's all she really cared about. And I think I really nailed the character, and I really enjoyed playing her as well. And I think after having all of that in mind straight away, and then learning the lines, it became less of a task, and it was really fun to do. For Claire, since the majority of her lines were dialogue with Joey, I found it easier to learn my lines just by reading them with Tristan, and as much as I could. It helped a lot doing this while also doing my other method when I could at home, because then I learnt it quite quick and a lot easier. That and the first method, like I said, reading it over, especially with dialogue, since I don't find it as easy as a monologue. Just doing that with someone, especially someone who was very quick to learn the lines, it really helped, and it was quite easy. I learned them quite quick. Also, when looking into Claire, I looked into the many things about her character that kind of really are important, eating disorders, the kind of mental health kind of that's going wrong, depression and all of that. I also looked into abusive kind of relationships because that's what's going on there between her and Joey. So I really looked into that when researching about her character, and then developed that even further. So her character could be all of that in one. And then I developed that further with the way she walked, where she talked, what kind of subtlety she'd do in her voice, which I will talk about more in the valuation. With Molly, I also just kind of looked into like I had certain inspirations, like I mentioned earlier as well. So when I did my research for the play, I also looked at Road as a whole. So the first thing I looked at, the things I need to consider, so script work, the kind of techniques that I'll need, the characters' relationships with each others, the actors and the audience relationship, the style, it's naturalism with non-naturalism, like elements within the script. So the acting will be naturalistic, where it's a very like extreme script. Looked at like the kind of circumstances that everyone's in, and then when looking into all of that, within that I look at the objectives of the actual assignment and what that is. They're very thorough lines, and I also looked at the subtext as well. The themes are like wealth and the poor and rich divide. So I know that all the characters are very like poor. That like the play is about what it was like. So I kind of looked into that and what it was like, because obviously Claire has quite like a rough time with that. Like that's a lot of her reasons why she even starves herself in the first place. And then for Molly, it's just still, with all the characters, it's all very similar. So to look at it as a whole was very helpful. So obviously Road is set in 1980 England, and it's all set in one night. So I had that to always think about, that like what the whole play is. If you look at it as a whole, it's kind of easier to look at then your characters as well. It's non-naturalistic, very bragged. The acting is naturalistic, like I said, and the characters are not over the top, and the situations they in are. So yeah, I looked at all of that as a whole to then go deeper into my own characters. During the rehearsal process, I took part in many warm-ups, like I mentioned earlier. I also did my own warm-up. For my warm-up, I did Mafia with like a twist. The first one I thought about my warm-up, I thought about how I should include vocal and physical elements, because Mafia is more of a game to wake up the mind than it is just a physical and vocal warm-up. So for that, it was just a normal game of Mafia, and then when it was like nighttime, when everyone was like supposed to be asleep, and then the Mafia would choose someone to kill, everyone would recite their lines and speak in the accent, and do that while waiting for the night to be over. So it was warming them up vocally, and then when they were having the discussion, they always, like, no matter what, they'd have to speak in the accent. So here's a clip of that.
We'll keep talking as well.
Mafia, eyes up! Who would you like to kill, Mafia? Then, for the more physical side of it, whenever they had to vote, they'd have to like run to where they had to vote.
Let's go faster, Mike.
Chance! Becca! Libby! Well, so they'd have 3 seconds to get to each corner, which would be like a specific person, and they'd have to run to get there, which would then like warm them up physically as well. And then throughout that, it's also waking up the mind, because I think it's very important to have like a warm-up that isn't just like vocal and physical, because you need to kind of be awake and in like listening, because for a lot of other warm-ups you don't actually have to be like there to partake in it, where with this you have to actually think. So I thought it was really useful to do that, and then also add a physical and a vocal element, which I did. During the rehearsal process, me and Megan, since we were playing the same character, we were in communication a lot about how we're playing each character. For example, with Molly, we both decided to share the same costume first of all, and then also we just talked about how we're playing her, like what kind of movements we're using to indicate that she's older, because obviously we're young people, so we need to kind of show that within our movements. So we both discussed the different ways we would walk, and we'd always talk about how we're playing each role, how we'd say, like if we would ever need help on how we'd say a certain line, we'd communicate with each other. And also with Michael, during this entire process, we'd always listen to any direction that we were given during rehearsal, especially in early rehearsal. It was kind of when we initially read the script, there was a certain way that I had in my head. So then when we were rehearsing, if Michael said, oh, if you say this line with a bit more subtlety or a bit louder, not like in a certain way. So I made sure I was listening to that during the whole rehearsal process as well. During the whole production as well, we'd always like I said earlier in this, we discussed like costume. So for Molly, like I said, I initially I saw her in like a dressing gown that would like indicate that she's kind of older, like she's just this old lady who'd wear a dressing gown. Is very like not like altogether like very rough. She'd just be going about in her dressing gown, like just because she's already lived her life, she's just trying to make the most of it now. So we had her in a red dressing gown and then a dress underneath that, and just some raggedy shoes. And then for Claire, we knew that it probably shouldn't be like a dress like most other characters. We went with a tracksuit bottoms and a shirt. We wanted to have like very bright colours because it's you know, very in time. So we all, like I was saying, we chose a tracksuit and a top for Claire, and we went with very bright colours because it's the 80s. So we took I wore a bright pink jumper, and then Megan wore a bright pink shirt, like a neon pink, and then my bottoms were just like bright red, and I had some raggedy shoes as well. Like the clothes weren't very like, it was to kind of show that like she's not well off as well. So it gave this, it still was in style for the 80s, and then also it had like, it was all like kind of worn down. Like my shoes were very worn down, so was the jumper and the tracksuit bottoms. Like they were all kind of like old, and we wanted to show that like she's not well off, she's not everything as well. And yeah, in the rehearsal process as well, we were in communication with the stage management, and we all got given where we have to come in from, where we need to be, and during the actual show, there was a plan for where we'd have to take on and bring off set, and we all took part in that. And I came in and I had to take a table off for the Valerie monologue. So as soon as like Ray was done, I'd have to wait and stand by to take that off. And we all did that as well. We all had our own jobs to do during the production, and also early we all had written our scripts, or wherever we had it written down where we had to come in from. We all learned that straight away as soon as we could, so we knew where we had to be at all times, making it just a lot more smoother. And yeah, that's all.